Ukraine has been issuing these warnings that Russia is somehow preparing an attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. And now that we're seeing videos coming out, sort of like the White Helmet style in Syria, uh, in preparation for the false flag chemical attacks that happened there, of Ukrainians preparing for some sort of nuclear strike, or some sort of strike by Russia on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. And this is one of the headlines that are being fed to credulous Western media outlets like the New York Post. Ukraine preparing for nuclear explosion as Russian troops ordered to leave Zaporizhzhia plant. The whole world is watching. And Zelensky was the first person to make this public and saying that Ukraine has received intelligence that Russia is preparing some sort of radiation leak at the nuclear plant. And everybody's taking it seriously. What gets left out of the discussion on this is that, first of all, it's Russia that occupies this plant and has for months. And it's been Ukraine that's been launching a counteroffensive, trying to retake the plant for months, and is in the process of that has been shelling the plant. And we're not allowed to learn that in Western media. It literally never gets reported that Ukraine has been shelling the plant. The way it's reported in places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, is that it's ambiguous. It's unclear who is shelling the plant that is currently being occupied by Russia and that Ukraine is trying to retake. And so when Ukraine puts out this warning that Russia is planning to somehow blow up the plant, it's taken seriously because we've been denied the basic fact that Ukraine is the one that's been shelling it for many, many months now, trying to retake it. And the Ukrainian narrative, though, just took a really, really big hit from the head of the IAEA, Grossi, who was recently interviewed about Ukrainian claims, and he basically shut them down in very diplomatic terms, but nonetheless refuted what Zelensky has been saying.
In Ukraine is saying, Volodymyr Zelensky a few days ago said that according to his intelligence, Russia has made all the preparation for an attack on the plant, not an accident, an attack. This chief of military intelligence said that preparations are being done. Russian troops have moved vehicles charged with explosives into the plant. They've mined the cooling pond. You have a team on the ground. Is this what they're witnessing?
Well, I would never, enter into an argument with the president of Ukraine, whom I know very, very well, and with whom I've been in contact regularly and meeting with him personally. What I can say is I was there. I did not see this kind of development. Our teams are there, and they are reporting every day what's happening. I'm not privy to this intelligence report that you are referring to.
Right. So you don't think that there will be a Russian attack on the plant? It's not what you're seeing.
What I'm saying is that we don't see what you just said. In terms of the future, I wouldn't be so, adventurous into getting to, what is going to happen or not happen there. I think anything can happen. This is what worries me.
Right.
So he's basically calling Zelensky a liar. That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
In very polite terms. He says, I wouldn't want to get into an argument with Zelensky, but everything he's saying is unsubstantiated. The team that's been there, the inspectors that have been there haven't seen that. And so long as he keeps saying that, I wonder how long he'll last in that position. Because as we know, there's a precedent of NATO powers using institutions, global watchdogs like the IAEA and the OPCW to serve their pro-war narrative. So I don't know. That's something to watch out for. But
well, we heard about, in the Bush administration, this Office of Special Plans inside the Pentagon of neocons that stovepiped intelligence. Yeah. And they were using it to influence international institutions as well as the media. You can assume there's a similar unit inside the Biden administration, probably might be in the NSC or the NSC itself. And they're probably stovepiping intelligence to the IAEA to try to get them to spout their line. They're definitely working the media in the US and obviously the Senate through the top warmongers, Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham of the Uniparty. This is where it's going. I mean, this is where this deception, it's already a deception, is going, and it's very troubling. It might be one of the most troubling stages of this war.
Blumenthal, and I want to put everybody in this body and this Congress on notice that the threat of a use of a nuclear device by Russia is real. And the best way to deter it is to give them clarity, the Russians, as to what happens if they do that. they will be in a war with NATO.
Poland is at immediate risk if the use of tactical nuclear weapons or destruction of a nuclear power plant causes radiation to spread, as almost certainly it would, causing significant human harm. This is not a kind of reckless or panicky resolution. It's based on fact and science, and it is meant to send a message to Vladimir Putin and even more directly to his military. They will be destroyed. They will be eviscerated if they use tactical nuclear weapons, or if they destroy a nuclear plant in a way that threatens surrounding NATO nations. Article 5 is there for a reason.
That's one of my favorite lines I've ever heard so far from these senators throughout the course of this proxy war. Lindsey Graham's been the source of so many, for example, when he said that, you know, as long as we aid Ukraine with military support, they'll fight to the last person, basically celebrating the sacrifice of Ukrainians for his hegemonic goals. But Blumenthal there, he says, Senator Blumenthal there says that this is not a panicky or reckless resolution. And then a couple of, you know, breaths later, he goes on to threaten war with nuclear war on Russia and like threatening to destroy them. Yeah. So this is not panicky. And by the way, I'm threatening Armageddon against Russia. And I'm doing it based on the evidence-free allegations of Ukraine, who have constantly accused Russia of things that they're not guilty of. Remember when those air defense missiles from Ukraine crossed into Poland? Immediately, Zelensky said that Russia did it. An anonymous senior U.S. official backed him up. That turned out to be a complete lie, but that was the closest we had come to direct NATO military intervention, which Zelensky was asking for, based on the false allegation that Russia had launched those missiles into Poland, when in fact it was Ukrainian air defenses. And they've done that so many times now. When Nord Stream was blown up, Russia was accused of doing that too. So now Russia is accused by Ukraine of plotting to blow up a nuclear power plant that it's currently occupying. And then immediately these senators introduce a measure threatening war with Russia based on that evidence-free allegation. And those of us like in the public, how are we supposed to take that? You have a pattern of deceptions intended to fuel the war. And now you have a measure explicitly threatening Russia with annihilation based on another one of these allegations. And like, it's hard not to feel extremely alarmed at this, because we're talking about a nuclear war here based on nuclear allegations. And I mean, at best, Ukraine is trying to distract the world from how badly the counteroffensive is going, or it's just bluffing in the hopes that that will somehow lead to pressure on Russia to withdraw from the nuclear plant, to give it back to Ukraine, which is Russia, I don't think, is going to do. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that an actual false flag is being planned. I don't think that's what it is, and that could just be me being optimistic and hoping, you know, for the world to survive. But honestly, I have to hope that these people aren't crazy enough to do something like that. But the problem is when you have this paranoid Cold War mindset that's completely taken over Washington, and you have a Ukrainian government that's dominated by a far right clique that hates anything to do with Russia and won't accept any kind of negotiation with Russia, you have to leave it open that these kind of scenarios are possible. That's a very scary thought.
Well, that was the scenario I raised at the UN, was that what Graham and Blumenthal are doing is setting down another red line reminiscent of the one that was officially established by the Obama administration in Syria. And as Charles Glass, in his Harper's piece called The Red Line, reported, quoting I guess it was a former State Department official or former U.S. diplomat, the red line was an invitation for a false flag. Because when you're saying that if anything happens around this nuclear power plant, if Russia attacks it, that we will come in and destroy Russia's army, and you are losing, you're getting clobbered, your counteroffensive is going nowhere, and you're running out of men and materiel, what else can you do?
Yeah.
So you take the situation in Duma, Syria, when the last vestige of the Saudi-backed Jaish al-Islam militia its most radical wing was refusing to negotiate, was on the verge of defeat in April 2018 with the Syrian army. The whole proxy war, that whole dirty war was being wrapped up by the Syrian army. They have nothing left but to just start showing images of kids being hosed down and a bunch of dead bodies in a basement to trigger Western intervention. And they know that the Western media will tell their story uncritically, and it will create panic through the Beltway Press Corps. The Beltway Press Corps will put pressure on President Trump, someone who is much less inclined towards this kind of action than maybe Joe Biden, but maybe someone who might even be more inclined towards sloppiness. And his kids were supposedly putting pressure on him. I mean, just take that situation and transpose it into the current reality where Ukraine's military is faltering badly. The success of its counteroffensive will depend on how much weapons it gets going forward, and essentially how long this war will last. It needs to break through to Melitopol and past Zaporizhzhia and get close to the Black Sea, so it can threaten Crimea and strike Crimea and start terrorizing the Crimean population to supposedly force Russia to the negotiating table. That's their plan, and it's not happening. So you got to go to plan B. And as we saw, let's pretend that the CIA is right here. Let's pretend that, according to the Discord chats, let's pretend that the assessments that we're seeing in the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal are correct, and that Ukraine's military did authorize a covert action to bomb the Nord Stream pipelines without Zelensky knowing. If that's true, how hard would it be for them to authorize some kind of false flag attack around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant to trigger Article 5, and at the very least a Polish military invasion of Western Ukraine, which would be followed then by U.S. peacekeepers to at least freeze the conflict to preserve the post-Maidan regime? How far-fetched is that? I unfortunately don't think it's very far-fetched.
And look, here's Zelensky talking recently. This is what he says. He says, Zelensky, before the NATO summit, which is coming up, in a week or so, before the NATO summit, we have to show results, but every kilometer costs lives. So he's acknowledging there that Ukraine's counteroffensive, it's a lot of people on his side are being sacrificed, but yet we have to show results. There's this pressure on him to show results, to bleed Russia. And yeah, I agree with you. Unfortunately, the scenario of a false flag in the context of this war and all the deception that's happened, it's not far-fetched. It just isn't. I still would like to think that they're not crazy enough to do that, but you can't rule it out. You just can't, especially based on everything. When you have the premier neocons in Congress, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, introducing this measure to basically repeat the red line scenario of Syria, you just can't rule this stuff out, unfortunately.